3 days after the night of fire and blood, I left Blackforge. The vast stone corridors no longer carried the sharp reek of smoke, yet the silence that filled them pressed heavier than any battle I had fought. Servants bowed too low when they passed me in the halls. Nobles offered smiles that never reached their eyes, their gazes always calculating, always measuring the new queen's outsider husband. The court had accepted Kyera as ruler, but many still waited patient as winter wolves for the first crack in her authority, so they could drive the blade home. I stood at her left shoulder each day as Warden of the North. The title sat foreign on my tongue, like a coat cut for broader shoulders than mine. They called me husband to the queen, the man who had helped crush Gorvak's rebellion, the rancher who had somehow tangled himself in the royal bloodline. None of those names felt like mine. Deep down, I remained Rowan Ashford, the man whose world had once been nothing more than frozen land, stubborn cattle, and winters, harsh enough to swallow the careless whole. Kyera governed with steady resolve and a mind sharper than most were willing to grant her. She dismantled the last pockets of resistance, forged new alliances, and slowly won the loyalty of houses that at once schemed against her. Every night she returned to our chamber, drained, yet determined, her steel-grey eyes still burning with the fire of a woman who had seized a throne in blood and flame. Every night I held her, pressed my lips to her forehead, and tried to convince myself that this was what victory looked like. Yet something deep inside me had begun to splinter. One cold evening, after another interminable council session that stretched long into the night, I stood alone on the eastern balcony, overlooking the scattered lights of the city far below. The mountain wind carried the crisp scent of pine and distant snow. It smelled like home, not the black stone and iron of Blackforge, but the wide open plains of Frost Hollow. Kyera joined me silently, her cloak brushing mine. She did not speak at first. She simply stood beside me, shoulder to shoulder, letting the wind tangle in her black hair. "You have grown quiet these past weeks," she said at last, voice soft but steady. I stayed silent for a long moment, letting the words I had carried for too long finally surface. "I need to go home." She turned to face me fully. Torchlight caught the steel grey of her eyes, turning them almost silver. "Blackforge is your home now." "No." My voice came quieter than I intended. "Blackforge is your kingdom. Frost Hollow is mine. The ranch has stood empty too long, the herds need tending, the fences are failing. Martha writes that the spring calves are arriving early, and no one there knows the land the way I do." Kyera studied my face the way she once studied battle maps, reading every line, every shadow, searching for the truth I could no longer hide. "You're leaving me." "I'm not leaving you," I said, taking both her hands. Her skin felt warm against the rough calluses earned from years of ranch labor. "I'm returning to the only place I ever truly belonged. You have a kingdom to heal. You have councils to persuade, laws to rewrite, and people who still doubt you. I cannot help you with any of that, but I can keep Frost Hollow alive and waiting for you." She stepped closer until our foreheads touched. Her breath mingled with mine in the cold air. "Will you wait for me?" I managed a small smile, though the ache in my chest made it difficult. "I waited 8 winters for you once. I can wait a little longer." She kissed me, then slow, deep, and laden with everything we could not express in words. When we finally drew apart, her eyes shone with unshed tears. 3 months, she whispered against my lips. "Give me 3 months to make Blackforge stable. Then I will come find you, I promise." I nodded. I did not trust my voice enough to speak. 3 days later, I left Blackforge without ceremony. No banners flew, no royal escort accompanied me, no farewell feast was held. Only Bren, my old warhorse, a single pack, and the long road north. Kyera rode with me as far as the northern gate. Beneath the massive arch of black stone, she took my face in both hands and kissed me as though she feared the mountain itself might swallow me whole. "I will come find you," she said, voice fierce against the wind. "No matter how long it takes." I rested my forehead against hers one final time. "I'll be waiting by the hearth." Then I turned Bren northward and did not look back. The journey home stretched across 9 long days. Each mile peeled away another layer of the man Blackforge had tried to make me. The steep mountain passes gradually gave way to rolling foothills, then to the wide frozen plains I knew by heart. Snow still clung stubbornly to the land, but the first signs of spring were breaking through thin green shoots piercing the white crust, the distant roar of rivers stirring from their long sleep. Bran's steady gait beneath me felt like the only constant in a world that had been turned upside down. Every night I made camp and stared into the flames, remembering the night I had carried her half-frozen body through the blizzard. The same wind that had howled around us then now whispered through the pines above my tent. I wondered if she was safe behind those black stone walls. I wondered if the court would truly release her when the time came. I wondered whether 3 months would prove enough for her to break free from the throne she had fought so hard to claim. The days blurred together in a rhythm of saddle leather, cold wind, and the endless white horizon. I spoke to Brand, sometimes low murmurs about the ranch, about Martha's cooking, about the black colt that had probably grown into a handful while I was gone. The horse would flick an ear as if listening, and for a moment the loneliness eased. On the ninth afternoon, the stone walls of Frost Hollow finally rose out of the white landscape like an old friend who had never forgotten me. The gates creaked open before I even reached them. Martha stood on the porch, arms crossed, eyes already glistening with unshed tears. Joran came running from the stable, his scarred face split into a wide relieved grin that made the old wound across his jaw pull tight. Martha pulled me into a fierce hug that nearly cracked my ribs. "You look like you've been dragged through hell and back," she said, voice thick. "I feel like I have." Joran clapped me on the shoulder hard enough to sting. "The herds have been waiting for you, boss. That black colt of yours has turned into a real handful. Kicked 2 of the hands last week." The ranch looked exactly as I had left it, snow on the roof, smoke curling from the great chimney, the familiar scent of hay, wood smoke, and home. Children's laughter rang across the yard once more. The black colt trotted to the fence and tossed its head as if scolding me for being gone so long. That first night I sat alone on the long wooden bench before the great hearth, the same bench where I had once laid her shivering body months ago. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows across the stone walls. The silver emblem of House Vorga still hung above the mantel. I stared at it for a long time, feeling the weight of crowns and thrones slowly slip from my shoulders like a heavy cloak finally set aside. Here there were no councils, no knives in the dark, no titles that felt borrowed. Only the wind outside, the warmth of the fire, and the quiet rhythm of a life I understood. I closed my eyes and let the ranch settle back into my bones. For the first time in months, I slept without dreaming of blood or fire or thrones. Yet even in that peace, one thought refused to leave me. I wondered how long 3 months would feel when every night I still listened for footsteps that never came. The first weeks back at Frost Hollow settled into a rhythm that felt both comforting and strangely distant, like slipping into an old coat that no longer quite fit the shoulders. Each morning I rose before the sky lightened, pulled on my worn coat, and stepped out into the lingering chill. Brand greeted me with the same raspy nicker he had used for years, as though nothing had changed. I spent long hours in the saddle, riding the pastures, mending sections of fence, weakened by winter storms, and helping with the difficult births that came in waves under the flickering glow of lanterns. My hands remembered every motion, the pull of wire, the careful turn of a calf in the womb, the steady pressure needed to drive a post deep into the thawing earth. The work was honest and demanding. It left little room for the endless counsels and hidden blades of Blackforge, and for that I was grateful. Martha moved through the days with her usual quiet efficiency. She placed generous meals on the table each evening, thick stews, heavy with root vegetables, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and a mug of spiced wine left warming beside my chair. She never pressed me with questions, but I caught her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking. Her eyes carrying the same mix of relief and worry I had seen the night I first carried Kyera through the blizzard. Joran lingered longer after supper. The grizzled stable master would sit by the lantern light, sharpening tools, his scarred jaw working as he shared small stories about the herds and the wolf pack that had grown bolder in my absence. "That black colt of yours has turned into a real terror," he said one evening, a rare grin cracking his face. "Kicked 2 of the hands clean across the yard last week. But he's got heart. Reminds me of you when you were younger." I listened, nodded, and felt a quiet gratitude for those ordinary voices. They grounded me. They reminded me that I was still Rowan Ashford, rancher of Frost Hollow, not some borrowed title standing at a queen's shoulder. The ranch itself began to wake fully with the season. Calves arrived in steady waves, their weak cries echoing through the barns at all hours. The black colt, once wild and defiant, finally accepted a saddle without protest after days of patient work. Children from the herding families ran freely through the yard again, their laughter ringing off the stone walls. Wildflowers pushed through the southern meadows in scattered bursts of white and violet, and the air carried the rich scent of damp earth and new grass. Rivers roared with meltwater, carving fresh paths across the plains. Everything around me was alive and moving forward. Yet, beneath the familiar rhythm, something inside me remained watchful. I threw myself harder into the labor, riding the high pastures to move the main herd to fresher grazing, and spending entire afternoons clearing fallen branches from the eastern fence line after a sudden late storm. My shoulders burned by evening and my hands cracked from the cold and rope, but the exhaustion was welcome. It kept the questions at bay, the ones that surfaced whenever the work slowed and the wind carried the faint sound of hooves from the southern road. At the end of the third week, the first letter arrived. I was checking a group of yearlings in the western pasture when Joran rode up holding a tin envelope sealed with the black wax of House Vorga. My pulse quickened before I could stop it. I took the letter with hands still dusty from the trail and broke the seal right there beneath the open sky. Kaera's handwriting was sharp and strong, the same steady hand I remembered from the nights we had sat together planning in the flickering light of Blackforge's chambers. The council has settled somewhat. Each morning I still miss the sound of your voice. Be patient with me. K. That was all, but it was enough. I read the short lines twice, then folded the paper carefully and slipped it inside my coat, close to my heart. For the first time since leaving Blackforge, a genuine warmth spread through my chest. Hope felt solid again, no longer just a fragile thing I had to guard against the wind. 3 months was not so long. She was fighting for an entire kingdom for the stability she had bled to win. I could wait. That evening I sat on the porch after supper, the letter resting against my ribs like a talisman. The sky had softened into deep indigo, and the first stars pricked through. Marta brought out 2 mugs of spiced wine and sat beside me without being asked. First letter, she asked quietly. I nodded. She's still fighting. But she remembers. Marta studied the horizon for a long moment. Good. Hold on to that. She didn't say more. She didn't need to. For the first time in weeks, I felt the ranch breathe easier around me. The black colt trotted past the corral fence and tossed its head, as if sensing the shift in my mood. Children's laughter carried from the far end of the yard. Even the wind through the pines sounded lighter. In the days that followed, I worked with renewed purpose. I led the main herd up to the higher grazing lands, where the grass grew thick and sweet. I helped Joran train the younger horses until both of us were sweat-stained and laughing at their stubborn antics. I sat with the ranch children in the late afternoons and taught them how to read wolf tracks and tie a proper rein knot. The labor felt clean again, purposeful. Spring advanced steadily now. Rivers ran loud and fast with snow melt. Wild blooms blanketed the southern meadows in defiant clusters of white and violet. The air smelled of damp soil and new life. Everything was coming back to life around me, and for a while I let myself believe the same was happening inside. I still caught myself pausing on the porch some evenings, eyes drifting toward the southern trail, but now the single letter tucked inside my coat made the silence feel bearable. It was a promise kept, however small. Kaera was still fighting, still thinking of me each morning. That knowledge carried me through the long days and the quiet nights. Marta watched me with cautious approval. Joran even clapped me on the back one afternoon and said, "You've got your fire back, boss. Good to see it." I smiled for the first time in weeks. The ranch was thriving. The herds were strong. The fences stood firm once more. Frost Hollow felt like home again. And somewhere far to the south, Kaera was working to make good on her word. I told myself that was enough. I told myself 3 months would pass faster now that I had something real to hold on to. I did not yet know how quickly that fragile hope would be tested when the second letter finally arrived, and the merchant who carried it brought darker news from Blackforge. The weeks that followed the first letter passed in a fragile kind of hope that I clung to like a man gripping a rope above a chasm. I continued the daily rhythm of the ranch with renewed energy. I rode the high pastures to move the main herd to fresher grazing land where the grass grew thick and sweet after the melt. I spent entire afternoons clearing fallen branches from the eastern fence line. After a sudden late storm, my shoulders burning with the honest ache of real work. The black colt, once wild and defiant, now carried riders without protest, and the younger horses were learning the trails under Joran's patient guidance. Calves that had been fragile newborns only weeks earlier now bounded across the pastures on sturdy legs. Children laughed freely through the yard, their voices carrying on the warming wind. Everything around me seemed to be coming back to life, and for a while I let myself believe the same was happening inside my own chest. Marta watched me with cautious approval. She still placed generous meals on the table each evening and left spiced wine warming beside my chair, but her eyes no longer held the same quiet worry. Joran even clapped me on the back one afternoon after we finished resetting a heavy gatepost together and said, "You've got your fire back, boss. Good to see it." I smiled for the first time in weeks. The single letter from Kaera rested against my ribs like a talisman. She was still fighting. She still remembered me each morning. 3 months suddenly felt possible. Then the wolves returned. They struck on a moonless night in the 6th week, bolder than they had ever been during my long absence. The frantic barking of the dogs tore me from sleep. By the time I reached the yard, Joran was already saddling horses, lantern swinging wildly from his hand. We rode hard into the lower pasture, torches flaring in the darkness. 6 dark shapes darted among the herd with ruthless coordination. I swung down from Bran with my sword drawn, voice raw as I bellowed to drive them off. Steel flashed. One wolf lunged at a young calf. I met it head-on, the impact jarring up my arm. The animal yelped and fled into the night, but not before leaving deep gashes across the calf's flank. We fought for nearly an hour, torches hissing in the wet grass, the herd bawling in panic. When the last of the pack finally retreated, 3 calves lay dead. The fence lay in splintered pieces where the wolves had torn through. I stood among the bloodied grass as the sky began to lighten, chest heaving, sweat and blood cooling on my skin. The exhaustion felt different this time, heavier, sharper. For the first time since returning, the ranch itself felt fragile, as though everything I had built could be taken away as easily as it had been given. Marta was waiting on the porch when we returned at dawn, a basin of hot water and clean cloths already prepared. She tended the worst of my cuts without speaking until the last bandage was tied. "You can't keep doing this, Robin," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of everything she had left unsaid for weeks. "You're not just working the land anymore. You're trying to outrun something that can't be outrun." I didn't answer. I simply kept polishing my sword until the blade gleamed under the lantern light. 2 weeks later, the second letter arrived. I was in the curing shed salting hides when Joran came running, holding a tin envelope sealed once again with the black wax of Hausvorga. My pulse quickened the same way it had with the first letter. I broke the seal right there, dust from the hides still on my hands. "Gorvak's last supporters have been dealt with," Kaira wrote. "I am closer to leaving than yesterday. Wait for me. K." The words should have lifted me. Instead, they landed with a strange heaviness. The merchant who had carried the letter lingered near the gate after Joran helped unload the supplies. He was a weathered man from Greyhaven with sharp eyes and a careful tongue. He pulled me aside when the others moved away. "Word from the south is uneasy," he said in a low voice. There was another attempt on the queen's life. A poisoned dagger slipped into her chambers at night. She survived, but the court has tightened like a noose. Roads north are being watched more closely than ever. Some say the queen may not be able to leave as soon as she hoped. The old families are still whispering. Gorvek's name still drifts on the wind in certain taverns. I thanked him and paid extra for the information, but the words followed me back to the great hall like shadows lengthening at dusk. That night I sat on the porch long after the others had gone to bed, the 2 letters resting inside my coat. The paper that had once felt like a promise now felt heavier than stone. I stared at the dark southern road until my eyes burned the wind moving through the pines with a colder edge than before. Doubt crept in like frost along the edges of open fields. The wolves, the merchants' warning, the growing silence, each one chipped away at the hope the letters had once given me. I still worked from dawn until dark, riding the fence lines until my shoulders ached, and helping with every difficult birth under lantern light, but the labor no longer drowned the questions. Marta and Joran exchanged worried glances when they thought I wasn't looking. The children grew quieter around me. Even the black colts seemed to sense the shift and tested me more often in the corral. By the 8th week, the silence from Blackforge had become a living weight. I still carried the 2 letters, but I no longer read them every night. Touching them now felt like pressing on a bruise I could not stop touching. The ranch continued its steady heartbeat around me, calves growing stronger on fresh grass. Rivers running quieter after the worst of the melt wildflowers blanketing the southern meadows, yet inside me, something had begun to fray. I rode the northern ridge more often, letting Brand choose his own pace while I stared south at an empty horizon. The wind carried only the rustle of young leaves and the distant call of birds. No banners, no royal escort, no single rider in a dark green cloak. The doubt I had tried to keep at arm's length finally sank its teeth in deep. 3 months had once felt like a vow I could hold. Now it stretched before me like the long empty road I had traveled home, full of promise that grew thinner with every passing day. The 9th week arrived like a slow bruise spreading across the sky. Spring had given way to the first warm breath of early summer, yet the ranch no longer felt like the refuge I had ridden 9 long days to reach. The meadows glowed with thick grass, the rivers ran quieter after the worst of the melt, and the black colt had become a reliable mount that even the younger hands could ride without fear. Calves that had been fragile newborns now bounded across the pastures on sturdy legs. Life at Frost Hollow moved forward with the steady, unstoppable rhythm of the seasons. I moved with it, but only on the surface. Inside, the silence from Blackforge had become a living thing. It pressed against my ribs each morning when I woke and followed me through every chore. The 2 letters I still carried inside my coat no longer brought comfort. I had stopped reading them days ago. The paper had grown soft at the folds, the ink slightly blurred from the constant press of my hands. Touching them now felt like pressing on a bruise I could not stop touching. Work no longer drowned the thoughts. I still rose before dawn and rode the fence lines until my shoulders burned, but the labor felt hollow. I repaired storm-damaged roofs until my hands cracked and bled. I pushed the herds to the sheltered valleys. I helped with every difficult birth under lantern light. The body kept moving, but the mind kept drifting south to a black stone fortress where a queen I loved was fighting battles I could not see. Marta finally broke her careful silence on a grey afternoon while we were salting hides in the curing shed. The smell of tannin and smoke hung thick around us. "You're disappearing, Rowan," she said, not looking up from the knife in her hands. "Even when you're standing right here." I kept scraping. "The ranch is running better than it has in years." "The ranch is fine. You are not." She set the knife down and faced me fully. "You haven't smiled since the second letter. You barely speak at meals. The children ask why the master looks like a ghost these days. Joran says you ride out at dawn and don't come back until the light is gone. This isn't waiting anymore. This is punishment." Her words landed harder than any blow I had taken in Blackforge. I wanted to argue, but the denial died in my throat. She was right. That night I sat on the long bench in the great hall, long after everyone else had gone to bed. The fire had burned low. The silver emblem of House Vorga caught the last red glow and seemed to stare back at me, a silent reminder of everything I had left behind. I thought of Kaera's face, the night she had pressed the blood seal and taken the throne. I thought of her mother dying in the Hall of Ashes. I thought of the promise she had whispered beneath the Blackstone Arch. 3 months. 70 days had passed since I left Blackforge. 70 days of holding to a vow made in the cold mountain wind. Then the late storm came. It rolled down from the peaks without warning on the 72nd day. It was not the killing blizzard of winter, but it came hard enough to drop 2 feet of wet snow in a single night and freeze the new grass beneath it. We lost 4 calves to the cold before we could get them under shelter. 2 of the older cows went lame, trying to reach the feed troughs through the drifts. The hands worked through the night in silence, their faces tight with exhaustion and worry. I worked beside them until my arms shook. When the storm finally broke at dawn, I stood on the porch and looked at the white blanketed land that had been green only yesterday. For the first time the ranch itself felt fragile, as though everything I had built could be taken away as easily as it had been given. Joran found me there, snow still clinging to his beard. "You thinking of riding south?" he asked quietly. The question had lived in my head for days. I didn't answer right away. Maybe, I said at last. Maybe she needs me there more than she needs me waiting here. Joran shook his head slowly. Or maybe she needs to know the man she married is still the one who keeps his word. His words landed harder than any blow I had taken in Blackforge. I turned and walked back inside without another word. The following days blurred into a grey haze. I pushed the herds to the sheltered valleys, repaired storm-damaged roofs until my shoulders burned and barely slept. At night, I lay awake listening to the wind and wondering if Kaera had already been forced to choose the throne over the rancher she had once called husband. The doubt I had tried to keep at arm's length finally sank its teeth in deep. By the 79th day, the weight had become unbearable. I rode the northern ridge alone at sunset. The sky flared with rose and molten gold. Below me, Frost Hollow rested peacefully in the valley, smoke curling from the chimney horses, grazing in the lower pasture's stone walls, glowing soft amber beneath the fading light. Everything looked perfect. Everything felt wrong. I sat atop Bran and spoke to the wind, the way a man does when the burden inside him has grown too heavy for silence. "If you are not coming," I murmured, "voice rough, tell me now. I can learn to live with absence, but do not force me to hope forever." The wind answered only with the rustle of young leaves and the distant call of a single bird. I turned Bran toward home. The familiar trail had never felt longer. Each step of the horse's hooves seemed to echo the same question: how much longer can you keep pretending this is enough? When I reached the great hall, the fire had already been lit. Marta and Joran had left a plate of food for me on the table, but I had no appetite. I sat on the long wooden bench and stared into the flames until the logs had burned down to glowing embers. The silver emblem above the mantel caught the last traces of light and held it as though mocking me. I closed my eyes and let the silence of the ranch press in around me. From somewhere far down the southern road, the faint but unmistakable rhythm of approaching hooves broke the quiet night. My eyes snapped open. I stood slowly, heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. The sound grew steadier, clearer. 1 horse. Traveling fast but not in panic. I walked to the door and stepped out into the cool evening air. The yard lay in soft shadow. Long shadows stretched across the packed earth. My pulse thundered in my ears as the rider came into view. A single figure on a tired horse, dark cloak, black hair moving with the breeze. I did not dare believe it, not yet. The rider emerged from the shadows of the southern road. Dark cloak, black hair moving with the evening breeze. The horse walked with the tired grace of one that had covered many hard miles. Even before she drew closer, I knew. Kaera. She saw me the instant I stepped into the yard. Her mount slowed, then stopped a short distance away. For several heartbeats, neither of us moved. The air between us felt thick with 3 months of silence distance, and every unsaid word that had grown heavy in my chest. She dismounted slowly, boots touching the ground, as though testing its reality after so many days in the saddle. She took one step, then another, until she stood directly before me. Dust clung to her cloak. A faint bruise lingered along her left cheekbone. Her steel-gray eyes met mine, carrying new shadows of exhaustion, but the same fierce clarity I remembered from the night I had carried her half-frozen body through the blizzard. "I told you I would come," she said, voice rough from the long road. I closed the distance in 2 strides and pulled her into my arms, lifting her clear off the ground. She wrapped herself around me, face pressed to my neck, hands gripping the back of my shirt as if she feared I might vanish into the wind. I held her just as fiercely, breathing in the scent of horse-road dust leather and the faint trace of mountain pine that still clung to her skin. For a long moment the world narrowed to the warmth of her body against mine and the steady rhythm of her breathing. Everything else, the wolves, the late storm, the merchant's warning, the 79 nights of doubt, fell away like dead leaves. When we finally drew apart, I kept my hands on her waist, unwilling to let go completely. "You came," I said, voice low and rough. "I promised." She lifted one hand and traced the line of my jaw, her fingers rough from travel but gentle. "I'm sorry it took so long." I shook my head. Words felt too small. Instead, I leaned down and kissed her slow, deep, and filled with every night I had sat by the fire, wondering if she would ever walk through my door again. She answered with the same quiet intensity, her fingers sliding into my hair, pulling me closer. When we parted, our foreheads rested together. "I kept the seat warm for you," I whispered. A tired but genuine smile curved her lips, and I kept counting the days until I could sit there again. Marta appeared briefly on the porch, took one look at us, and quietly retreated inside with a small, knowing smile. Joran, watching from the stable doorway, simply nodded once and led Kaera's tired mare away to give us privacy. I took her hand and led her into the great hall. The moment we stepped inside, the familiar warmth wrapped around us. The long wooden bench still sat in its place near the hearth. The fire burned low and steady. Everything looked exactly as it had when I first carried her half-frozen body through the door months ago, yet nothing felt the same. Kaera stopped in the center of the hall and looked around slowly, as though seeing the space with new eyes. "It feels smaller than I remembered," she said quietly. "Or maybe we have grown larger," I replied. She walked to the bench and sat in the exact spot where she had once lain shivering. I sat beside her. For a long moment we simply watched the flames dance across the stones. "I left Blackforge stable," she said at last. Her voice was low but steady. "The last of Gorvak's supporters have been dealt with. The council has accepted the new laws. I appointed Thorn to oversee daily affairs. He is capable. The kingdom will not collapse in my absence." I studied her profile in the firelight. "You really stepped away from the throne, not forever." She turned to face me. "But for now, yes. I told them I needed time with my husband. Some protested. A few tried to stop me, but I reminded them that a queen who cannot choose her own life is no queen at all." She reached out and took both my hands. "There was one last attempt," she admitted. "A poisoned dagger slipped into my chambers 3 nights before I left. I handled it. But every delay felt like another day stolen from us. I kept thinking, what if you finally stopped believing I would come?" I squeezed her hands. "I never stopped believing. I just learned how heavy waiting could feel." Kaera leaned forward until our foreheads touched. "I don't want to be a queen who rules from a distance anymore," she whispered. "I want to be here with you. Blackforge can survive without me for months at a time, I've made sure of it. But this place, this ranch, this is where I want to come back to. This is where I want to build something real." I searched her face and found only truth. "Then we'll make both places ours," I said. "You return when the kingdom calls. We come back here when we need each other. This home will always be waiting." She smiled, small, tired, but real. "No more secrets," she whispered. "No more secrets," I agreed. Night wrapped Frost Hollow in a gentle hush by the time we left the great hall. We climbed the stairs slowly, fingers laced together, neither of us in any hurry to break the silence. The bedroom door closed behind us with a soft sound that felt like the final page turning in a long, difficult chapter. The small fire in the hearth had burnt low, filling the room with a warm golden glow that danced across the wooden beams and the wide bed. We undressed each other without haste, hands moving with quiet recognition and tenderness. There was no rush, only the deep need to feel real and present after so many months apart. When we finally lay beneath the blankets, her head rested on my chest and my arm curved around her back. The silence between us felt full, comfortable, and safe. For a long time we simply breathed together. "I kept imagining this exact moment," she said, eventually voice soft. During the final councils, while signatures were being sealed and threats still circled the walls, I would close my eyes and picture us right here. No titles, no guards outside the door, just you and me and this quiet. I ran my fingers slowly down her spine. I pictured it every single night downstairs. Sometimes I wondered if I was only imagining it to keep myself from breaking. She lifted her head to look at me. "It wasn't imagination. I'm here." I searched her eyes. "And you're sure you can step away from the throne for stretches of time?" "I made certain arrangements before I left," she answered. "Thorn is reliable. The council understands I will return when major matters demand it. But I told them clearly my life cannot belong entirely to Blackforge. Part of it belongs here with you." A small smile touched my lips. "So we share the weight." "We share everything now," she said softly. She settled back against me. The fire crackled once, then fell quiet again. "I don't regret any of it," she continued after a pause. "Not the pretending, not the fear, not even the pain of those months apart. Because all of it led me here, to choosing you without anyone forcing my hand." I kissed the top of her head. "And I choose you, every day. Whether we are here, or in Blackforge, or somewhere in between." We talked until the fire died to glowing embers. We spoke of small things and large ones, of future calves and future journeys, of how we would balance the ranch and the kingdom, of the life we wanted to build together, one that did not require crowns or chains to feel complete. Eventually sleep claimed us. When I woke the next morning, Kyra was still beside me, breathing deeply. Sunlight streamed through the window, warm and golden. I lay still for a long time, listening to the distant sounds of the ranch, waking up a cough, calling Jordan's voice from the stable, Martha humming in the kitchen below. This was real. Kyra stirred, opened her eyes, and smiled when she saw me watching her. "Good morning," she murmured. "Good morning." We dressed slowly and went downstairs together. Martha had prepared a generous breakfast. Jordan joined us for a short while, his usual gruff manner softened by obvious relief at seeing Kyra back. The conversation flowed easily, full of ordinary things: the new fall expected next week, the condition of the south fence, the price of wool in Greyhaven. After breakfast we walked the ranch together. Kyra moved through the pastures and barns with quiet wonder, touching gateposts, running her hand along wooden rails, breathing in the scent of hay and earth. I walked beside her, answering every question, watching the way the summer light played across her face. At the western corral the black colt trotted over. Kyra extended her hand and let him sniff her palm before stroking his neck. The horse leaned into her touch, calm and trusting. "He knows you," I said. She smiled. "I know him too." We continued walking until we reached the open field beyond the main buildings. The land stretched wide and green under the clear sky. Kyra stopped and looked out across it. "This is what I fought for," she said. "Not just the throne, not just survival. This kind of peace. The freedom to stand here with you and not be afraid of what tomorrow might take away." I slipped my arm around her waist. "Then we protect it together," I told her. "Whatever comes, whether from Blackforge or from the world beyond these fences, we face it side by side." She turned in my arms and looked up at me. "No more pretending," she said. "No more waiting," I answered. We stood there for a long time, the breeze moving gently through the grass, the sun warm on our skin. The ranch continued its quiet work around us. Life moved forward, simple and steady. The story that began the night I carried her out of the blizzard had finally come full circle. And here in the open fields of Frost Hollow, with no crowns between us and no secrets left to keep, a new chapter was beginning. One built on truth, one built on choice, one built on the simple, powerful decision to come home to each other again and again. For as long as we both drew breath, we were home.